Hello, my friends. My name is Gerdes. Here are three big stories about Ukraine for today. If you're unfamiliar with me, I talk about Ukraine war news in the morning with a daily brief, and then I do three big stories in the evenings. Okay, so before Zelensky left the United States, after the NATO summit, Zelensky invites American governors to visit Ukraine. So he was at a speech at the session of the National Association of Governors of the United States in Utah on Friday. He invited its representatives to visit Ukraine to personally assess the consequences of Russian terror. I think this was a genius move. Remember, these governors, many are going to become congressmen or senators or be playing in the leagues for potential president somewhere down the line, and it's good to have them understanding what's going on. It's probably not quite as effective as having congressmen on board, but it's still going to have some impact. Many of you have probably heard or seen in the media about the recent Russian missile strike on a children's hospital, Zelensky says, several days ago. A direct hit on one of the hospital buildings, and this could have not just been a coincidence. He also said that since the beginning of this full-scale invasion, now these are facts that he laid out for them, this is pretty amazing, the Russian Federation has destroyed almost 160,000 civilian objects, including 130,000 residential buildings, 3,000 schools and universities, 700 medical institutions, and 170 churches. These are war crimes. This should never have been happening. And that is why we so deeply appreciate it when our friends from around the world come to Ukraine to see everything for themselves. So this was a masterstroke on Zelensky's part, putting himself in front of this audience. So here, for example, he met with Colorado Governor Gerdes. Colorado and the United States are proud partners in President Zelensky's fight to protect Ukraine and Europe from dictator Vladimir Putin. So Polis has been supportive of Ukraine. Following the invasion, the Polis administration directed state agencies to terminate any contract with Russia state-owned contractors or subcontractors. That's the state of Colorado, just one of 50 states, but still, ensured future procurement efforts, analyze any possible connection with Russian state-owned companies, higher education institutions divested from Russian state-owned companies. Colorado PERA also quickly divested $7.2 million from a Russian bank, and Polis urged them to completely divest the PERA trust fund from all Russian state-owned companies and other things, right? So it's good to have these governors on board. Now, he's a Democrat governor. What about the Republicans? Well, the governor of Oklahoma is a Republican, and this was carried on their local TV station. We're just going to watch this little clip.
All our friends in America and all Americans who support Ukraine, our people, our freedom, our independence in this terrible war started by Russia. Thank you so much for your support.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky speaking before the National Governors Association on Friday in Salt Lake City. Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt recently named the association's vice chair. Stitt today signaling he would support additional aid for Ukraine in their war with Russia.
Taking a percentage of our national defense budget and helping one of our allies defend against an aggression makes common sense to me. I think it makes common sense to most Oklahomans, most Americans.
Now, that's interesting. Now, he's a governor. He doesn't have a say in giving U.S. defense policy, budget, that kind of thing. But he's a Republican. And just like the Democrat governor of Colorado, supporting Ukraine. Now, this is important. Here's why.
Its position seems to differ from that of President Trump's, who's previously taken issue with how much money the U.S. is sending. The president spoke before Turning Point USA last month.
He just left 4 days ago with $60 billion, and he gets home and he announces that he needs another $60 billion, else it never ends.
Republicans need to be pushing Trump the right direction to support Ukraine. So it's important that he has both Republican and Democrat support, and that was a genius stroke by Zelensky to speak there. Okay, so here's a second big story. The president of Russia signed a law introducing a progressive personal income tax scale. The president signed the federal law on the amendments to Part 1 and 2 of the Russian Federal Taxation Code. Essentially, what they're doing is they're increasing all the tax brackets in order to squeeze another $22 billion, I think it was, out of the Russian people for support support for the war in Ukraine. That's not going to be a popular move. It squeezes out some from the corporate income tax, but that's what Putin has to do because he's kind of up against it, spending pretty recklessly on the war in Ukraine. Now, Tim Snyder is talking about why Russia is acting like they do. This is big story number 3, and I think this is really informative. And if you haven't heard this argument before, you need to understand it and probably embrace it. I think he's right. The host will be speaking in, I think, Ukrainian. I don't speak it, so I can't tell, but you'll see subtitles, and then Snyder will largely speak in English with a little bit of a foreign language with subtitles.
А ваша думка, чому взагалі Росія обрала для себе такий шлях? Ну, очевидно, вони теж розуміють, що вони вчиняють саме геноцид.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a wonderful question, and it's a bit of a mystery to all of us, isn't it? I mean, I think the war, I'll give you a logic, and then we can all think about it, ask the Russians in 10 years. But the war is based on the principle that you don't exist. Right?
Okay,
the
it's
principle
not
of the war
about,
is,
right, that's exactly right. It's not about because they were going to join NATO or because they were Nazis or any other excuse that the Russians have put out there to the world. It's that you're not really Ukrainian, you're really us, and you're rebelling against your own Russianness.
Українців немає, України немає, української культури немає. This is the principle, right? That there's not really Ukraine. There's only Russia, great Russian history, great Russian culture. Now, and so the idea was to come in and kill or deport people like you, people like everybody here, and then the happy Ukrainian peasant masses would just go along and accept they were Russian. That was the idea. What happens, though, when it turns out that's not true? Right.
And this was something that the Russians thought was going to happen when they first invaded. They thought, oh, the Ukrainians, they'll just meet us with open arms and they'll want what we're bringing to them, that we're going to be reuniting ourselves, and it didn't work out because they are different.
Everybody wants to be Russian. No. So that turns out not to be true. Then how do you feel? Well, you feel, I need to kill more and more people, right? At first, you think it's just an elite that's Ukrainian, then you realize more people are Ukrainian, then you realize there's an entire Ukrainian nation. And so the logic is, okay, I have to kill more and more people in order to get to those Ukrainians who want to be Russians. And you do that long enough, and you realize there aren't very many Ukrainians like that, and suddenly you find yourself in this completely genocidal position, which is where they are. When they started, I mean, they said quite openly, this is a colonial mission. We're gonna kill the elites. We're going to put people in camps, and then the rest of the country will go along. That's already genocidal. But when it turns out that there are more people that you have to kill, then you kill more people. And that's what they say this openly on television. They started out by saying thousands or tens of thousands, and now they say, well, it turns out there are more Ukrainians, so we have to kill millions. So I think that's...
And that's the Russian mentality, and you can see this even in something like this. The Kremlin is rewriting Wikipedia. The Russian version, the RU Wiki project, might be called Orwellian if the author were not himself occasionally censored. The entry of 1984, for example, omits the regular site's description of Winston Smith's Ministry of Truth, where historical records are corrected. Now, here's what's going on in Russia. Russian atrocities in Bucha, near Kyiv, in 2022 are reimagined as Ukrainian and Western disinformation campaign. How about that? Kherson, a Ukrainian city being destroyed by Russian bombs, is mentioned without a word about the war. The execution of 22,000 Polish officers in 1940 is rewritten to cast doubt on the archived documents, proving it was done by Soviet secret services. And all references to Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, who was killed in prison in February 2024, are altered to describe him as a blogger. Like, you're rewriting history, and there's a reason that you're rewriting history, because the history that you have is just not that pleasant. But, the world can't seem to see it. Like, they can see some things, but they can't see others. I saw this meme, and I thought, wow, it's almost like that. My wife laughed at this because, men be like, where's the ketchup? I can do that sometimes. I look in the refrigerator, and I'm like, it's like staring right at me, but I can't see it. But yet, the same men can see, sniper in that building, 400 yards out past those trees. what? And you can't see the ketchup? It's kind of like that. With you can see all kinds of problems in the world, but you think Ukraine is something that you can just look past? Why? This is important, folks. People are literally dying. Thank you for being the kind of person that cares. Thank you for the likes and the shares and the subscribes. But more than anything else, thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.